This video and channel is sponsored by Ratchet Clothing. Check out Ratchet's new Zodiac and Constellation collection. I'll put a link in the video's description. I receive a lot of requests from people asking questions about associates, specifically how an associate gets to go from one family to another. I think a good starting point is why these transfers take place. It's important to remember whoever an associate is on record with is 100% responsible for him. In my time, I had very few associates on record with me. My reasoning was, first, I wasn't a Gambino, but more significant than that, I didn't want to expose myself to headaches. I've seen what other guys have gone through on account of their associates. Let's start with some of the reasons why an associate would be persona non grata with the guy he's with or the crew he's around. Some associates become more of a liability rather than an asset. You want an asset, you don't want a headache. Recklessness. You don't want an associate who constantly talks and texts on the phone. In that life, everyone should know that little square thing that's in your pocket is the enemy. So an associate bringing you unnecessary attention is not good for you. One example of this was an associate to Patty Delarosa named Danny Campo. He was constantly on his phone trying to speak in code. And let me just say this, the FBI knows more about code talk than the associates do. How do you think they learned it? You never want a guy to tell you on the phone, hey, I got that package or those packages for you. It could be clothes or food or something that somebody sent you innocently, but to an agent that's possibly listening to your call, he's equating packages to junk. So as a result of a reckless associate, you now have a team of agents on you. Speaking of which, you may have an associate that you find out is dealing drugs, or maybe you warned him not to, and he does so anyway. It would be in your best interest to chase him away from you. Catching an associate in a lie. And this happens a lot when they get themselves into problems. If you have to go to a sit down over him and he lies to you or conveniently leaves something out, you're losing that decision. You also don't want an associate that has you constantly going to sit downs. Most of the people don't understand. Going to sit downs is exposure for a guy in that life because you have to meet with other members or even captains to discuss whatever the issue is. Some guys in that life manage to stay off the radar. But if you're meeting with a guy who's on the radar and they see you in his company, now you become hot too. An associate who demonstrates insubordination obviously don't respect you. And in that case, he should be chased immediately. As a matter of fact, a guy in that life might want to teach him never to be disrespectful to you ever again. As I've mentioned before, you're responsible for your associates. So if you have a guy who's running around embarrassing himself, that's a bad look for you as well. I had an associate named AJ, and he was from Hicksville, Long Island, and I wind up chasing him. The first thing I noticed was a pattern of him getting into problems. And coincidentally, whoever he had a problem with, according to him, would make statements like, I'm not worried about the Lucchese family, or something along those lines. After hearing one of those statements the first time, I told him, okay, set up a meeting with this guy, and we're going to teach him why he should be worried. But after that, I noticed every time he got into a problem, whoever it was that he had the problem with said something similar along those lines. So what I learned is that AJ liked to embellish a story and add a little drama to it. The next issue I had with him is I had a stack of about 40, 50 lottery tickets on a counter in my house. One night I had two visitors. First, Danny Campo came to see me, and then AJ came. And they were both there at different times. The next day when I looked at my counter, I noticed that the lottery tickets were missing. When I mentioned this to Danny, he had told me on a recent vacation that he had with AJ, he had hid $1,800 in the villa that they were in, and that the money came up missing, and AJ was the only one who knew where it was. But I didn't put a lot of weight into that story because Danny could have easily been pointing suspicion away from him because he also could have been guilty for taking the lottery tickets. The final straw for me with AJ was he was in my car one day and he seen a phone that I had just replaced with a cracked screen. And he said to me, do you want me to get this fixed? I know a guy who could fix it. So he takes the phone and I don't hear from him for a week. I tell Danny, get in touch with this AJ and tell him to meet us at Bella Norte tonight. Bella Norte is a restaurant in Belmore, Long Island. When AJ gets there, I walk outside and he hands me my phone, still with the cracked screen. So I look at the phone and I question him, what's this? And he's not looking at me in my eyes. He says to me, oh, when I brought the phone to my friend, he was a little busy and he didn't get time to fix it yet. I looked at him. I didn't say a word. I turned around and walked back into the restaurant. So when I go home that night, I'm looking at the phone. Back then, I didn't have an iPhone. And I opened up the phone and I noticed that the SIM card is missing. I called Danny and told him, get Louis Jet and come meet me. I explained to both of them my suspicions of what I thought AJ did with the SIM card. Then I told Danny to go see AJ and tell him don't come around us anymore. And if he asks why, just tell him you only given that message. On a side note that I find amusing, not too long ago, a friend of mine called me from a restaurant in Long Island called Mia Posto. And guess who was sitting at the table with Danny Campo and Butch Arpino? AJ. Anyway, the word poaching also relates to associates. And this takes place when another inducted member attempts to steal an associate. In a previous video, I've spoken about Patty Della Rosa being a poacher. At one time, he poached an associate of Johnny Sideburns named Richie Guadano. Then, when he was unable to control Richie, he gives him back to Sideburns, who demonstrated his inability to control him either. One day, Joey Amato, who's a Colombo captain, complained about Ernie Grillo, who's a Gambino, poaching a Colombo associate. So poaching is something that goes on a lot in that life. There's another term, putting an associate in limbo. And this takes place when an associate who's on record with somebody is spending time and doing business with another member or members without permission. Now, what's an associate's main goal? To get straightened out one day. So his punishment for his dual allegiance is to never release him, which is the proper term for letting an associate go. You release him. By not releasing him, he has to remain with you. Even if you don't bother with him, he's still with you. Obviously, you're never going to propose him or put him up for membership, and he remains in associate limbo. One example of this, and I'm not going to get too much into detail because it's going to be a future video. Basically, Matty Madonna had a guy that he was keeping around him, and word got out that he had very big intentions for this guy. But it turns out the guy was an associate to the West Side, the Genovese family. Nevertheless, the West Side let Matty know that the guy was unequivocally with them, and they put the guy in question in associate limbo. An associate can be released, and in that case, he could be put on record with another guy or another family for that matter. Some associates are even traded, as was the case for Joe Cafe, who was a former associate of the Gambino family. The Lucchese family traded one of their associates to the Gambino family, and as part of the trade, they received Joe Cafe. Sometimes a family will pull an underhanded move to get an associate. For instance, Carlo Profeta had always been a Gambino associate. As many of you know, Carlo was an associate to the Roy DeMeo crew. So one day, the Gambinos were looking for Carlo, and they ran into a couple of Lucchese guys and asked if they seen him. And the Lucchese guys turned around and said, yes, we did see him, and oh, by the way, we straightened him out last week. There are many instances where this type of situation took place. Not the best way to keep good relations with another family, because after a guy's inducted, there's not much the other family could do about it. As I've mentioned numerous times, greed takes a big part of that life. So if an associate is a big earner and put money in everybody's pocket, all of the above that I spoke about is overlooked. When it comes to associates, there's a great deal that can be said. But during my time in that life, I've learned that associates who are at the bottom of a family's pecking order are dispensable. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed, you could do that as well. And if you think that friends and family may enjoy watching this, please share it and thank you. Okay, till the next time. You can subscribe to the Sit Down News blog at sitdownnews.com, and I appreciate everyone who has subscribed. Thank you. Well, just another example in the mob you never knew about. If you would like to subscribe to this channel, you can do so down below. If you would like to subscribe to my other channel, Unlimited Substance Podcast, I'll add a link in the description to this video.